All right, so you're ready to really boost your English vocabulary.
That's right. And you're looking for ways to make it happen even if you only have like 10 minutes a day.
That's awesome, because we're going to unlock some serious word power today.
Yeah, we're going way beyond just basic vocabulary lists.
We're using insights from this really cool language learning podcast.
It's called English Vocabulary in 10 Minutes a Day.
And get ready, because we're going to dive into some practical, research-backed strategies.
Strategies that'll have you using new words like a pro in no time.
First up, we have mind mapping.
Have you ever played around with mind maps before?
I have, and it's amazing how helpful they are for understanding connections between words.
Yeah. But like, what's the science behind it? Why are mind maps so effective?
Yeah, why are they so good for learning?
Well, we got to think about how our brains work. Like, we're wired to see patterns, right?
Yeah.
To make those connections visually.
Uh-huh.
So with a mind map, you're basically creating like a visual web of words.
Right.
Around a central theme.
Yeah.
And this spatial organization, it actually like taps into our visual and spatial memory.
Oh, interesting.
Making it way easier to recall information later on.
So it's not just about memorizing like individual words, it's more about...
It's about understanding how they relate to each other.
Yeah.
Within a larger context.
So instead of just having a list of random words, you're creating this interconnected web of meaning.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's like building a mental landscape for those words to live in.
I like that.
The podcast mentioned a student, Maria, and she aced a presentation using mind maps.
Oh, wow.
And it sounds like she was able to remember specific vocabulary because it was all organized around like the theme of her presentation.
Exactly. So instead of just memorizing, a bunch of business jargon, she probably created a mind map.
Right.
With like business meeting at the center.
Yeah.
Branching out to categories like introductions or presenting data or asking questions and so on. And by associating words with those specific scenarios, she like created this mental framework.
Yeah.
For using them effectively.
That makes so much sense. It's not just about knowing the words, it's about knowing when and how to use them.
Exactly.
So if someone's listening and thinking, okay, mind maps sound cool, but how do I actually do it?
Right.
What would you tell them?
Pick a theme. Pick a theme that's relevant to you, something that you're interested in learning more about.
So it could be anything.
Anything. It could be cooking, sports, music, technology.
Whatever gets your brain firing.
Yes. Write that theme in the center of a page.
Okay.
And start branching out.
Right.
What are the key categories related to that theme? And then under each category, list specific words or phrases that come to mind.
And don't forget the visuals. The podcast really emphasized making those mind maps colorful and engaging.
Yes.
Add images, drawings, symbols, anything that helps those words like jump off the page and into your memory.
I love that.
Okay. Mind mapping is a great starting point, but now we're getting to the real game changer. Spaced repetition.
Oh, yeah. Spaced repetition.
It's a technique I've heard a lot about, but I'm always curious to learn more about like the science behind it.
Yeah.
Why is spaced repetition so much more effective than just cramming vocabulary?
Well, it all comes down to how our brains forget information, right?
Right.
There's this thing called the forgetting curve.
Okay.
Which basically shows that we forget things rapidly at first.
Oh, okay.
But then the rate of forgetting slows down.
Interesting.
So spaced repetition works by like strategically timing your review sessions.
Okay.
To combat this forgetting curve.
So you review information just before you're likely to forget it.
Exactly.
And that strengthens the memory each time. So it's like giving your brain a little workout.
Exactly.
Reminding it, hey, remember this word, it's important.
I love that.
The podcast mentioned using flashcards or apps like Anki or Quizlet.
Oh yeah, I've heard great things about those.
Me too. They like automate the spaced repetition process so you don't have to keep track of when to review each word.
Exactly. Imagine you're trying to learn the word resilient, right?
Okay.
You'd create a flashcard.
Okay.
With a word on one side.
Uh-huh.
And the definition and maybe like an example sentence on the other.
Okay.
And you'd review it frequently at first.
Okay.
Maybe every few hours.
Okay.
Then gradually increase the intervals as you become more familiar with it.
It's like you're training your brain to hold on to that word.
Exactly.
Making it readily available when you need it.
Yes.
And they even shared a story about a learner named Ahmed.
Oh, cool.
He used spaced repetition to build up his vocabulary, and he ended up impressing native speakers with his word choices.
Oh, wow. That's amazing.
Now that's what I call a success story. So we've talked about mind mapping.
Uh-huh.
We've covered Space repetition.
Yes.
What's the next tool in our vocabulary arsenal?
Themed lists.
Yeah.
This is where we start thinking about context. Learning individual words is great.
Right.
But to truly master them, you need to understand how they fit into specific situations.
So it's like learning a new dance move.
Yeah.
You need to know not just the steps, but also the rhythm.
Yes.
And the context of the music.
Absolutely.
So how do we create these themed lists? What's the strategy here?
Think about the situations in your life where you need to use English.
Okay.
Do you travel frequently?
Uh-huh.
Do you work in a specific field?
Yeah.
Do you have hobbies that require specialized vocabulary?
Yeah, I can see that.
Those are all potential themes for your lists.
So if you're planning a trip, you might create a list of words related to airports, transportation, accommodation, and sightseeing.
Exactly.
You'd have words like boarding pass, customs, check-in counter, arrival gate.
Yes. Having those words at your fingertips would make navigating the airport a breeze.
Totally.
Or like if you're a foodie,
Yeah.
you might create a list of culinary terms.
Ooh, yeah.
Focusing on different cuisines, cooking techniques, or ingredients.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
By grouping words into these themed lists, you're not just memorizing them in isolation.
Right.
You're creating a mental framework
Yeah.
for using them in specific contexts.
So it's about making those words work for you in real-life scenarios.
Exactly.
And the podcast challenged listeners to create their own themed list this week.
Oh, that's a great idea.
Yeah, that's a great way to put this into practice. Now, before we move on to the next technique, I want to pause for a moment and ask you, as the listener, what's standing out to you so far? Which of these techniques resonates with you the most? And why?
Yeah, what sparks your interest? What feels like it could be a game changer for your vocabulary learning?
Okay, so ready to move on to the next strategy. This one is all about making vocabulary learning fun.
Fun. Yeah.
Because let's be honest, if it feels like a chore, we're less likely to stick with it, right?
Absolutely.
What are some ways we can, inject some enjoyment into the process?
So there's this misconception that learning has to be this serious, dry experience.
Yeah.
But the truth is our brains learn best when we're engaged in having fun.
I love that. The podcast highlighted a few fun methods. One that I've personally found helpful is using apps and games.
Yeah, apps and games.
Like Duolingo and Memrise.
Those are great.
They turn vocabulary learning into, a game.
Right.
With points and rewards and even a bit of friendly competition.
Those can be fantastic tools, especially for building a foundation and staying motivated.
Totally.
And they're so accessible, too.
Right.
You can learn anytime, anywhere, right from your phone.
That's the best part.
But the fun doesn't stop there.
Right. What about, incorporating English language media into our routine?
Oh, yeah.
I'm talking movies, TV shows, podcasts, music, all those things we probably enjoy already.
It's like passive learning disguised as entertainment.
Exactly. You're absorbing new vocabulary without even realizing it.
The key is to be an active listener or a viewer. Don't just let the words wash over you.
Okay, yeah.
If you hear a word you don't recognize, jot it down. Look it up. Try to use it in a sentence.
Oh, I like to keep a little notebook handy for new words I come across while watching or listening. It's amazing how quickly that notebook fills up.
That's a great idea.
Yeah.
And the podcast also talked about actively using new vocabulary. And this is where things like journaling, having conversations, and finding a language partner come in.
That's where the real magic happens.
Yeah, it is. By putting those words into practice, you're moving them from your passive vocabulary to your active vocabulary,
right,
making them a part of your everyday communication.
And speaking of active learning, the podcast shared a great story about a guy named Raj.
Okay.
Who was really passionate about cooking, and he started watching English cooking shows.
Uh-huh.
And he picked up all sorts of culinary vocabulary naturally.
Oh, that's cool.
It just goes to show you, when you connect your language learning to something you're genuinely interested in, it becomes so much more enjoyable.
Absolutely. That's a fantastic example of how passions can fuel language learning. And it highlights an important point. There's no one-size-fits-all approach to vocabulary learning.
Right.
It's about finding what works best for you, what keeps you engaged and motivated.
So we've explored 4 powerful strategies for expanding our vocabulary: mind mapping, spaced repetition, themed lists, and making learning fun. It's amazing how much we can accomplish in just 10 minutes a day when we use these techniques strategically.
And these aren't just random tips either. The podcast cited research that shows that learners who use structured techniques like these retain vocabulary up to 40% faster.
40%? That's huge.
Yeah.
And it makes sense, right? We're actively engaging with the material, making connections, and reinforcing those connections over time.
Exactly. It's about quality over quantity.
Right.
It's not just about cramming as many words into your brain as possible.
Yeah.
It's about building a deep understanding of those words and how to use them effectively.
So we've covered a lot of ground today.
We have.
But before we wrap up, I want to make sure you walk away with those, key takeaways.
Yeah, for sure.
Are you ready for a quick recap?
Absolutely. Fire away.
All right. First up, mind mapping. Use those visual webs to map out connections between words.
Yeah.
Make them more memorable. Next, we have spaced repetition. Strategically review those words.
Right.
Combat the forgetting curve and lock them into your long-term memory.
Exactly.
Then there's themed lists.
Yes.
Group words by topics that are relevant to your life so you can start using them in real-world situations.
Absolutely.
And finally, the most important takeaway of all, make it fun.
Yes. Have fun.
Find what brings you joy in the learning process, whether it's through apps or entertainment or connecting with other learners.
Yeah. Find your thing.
Exactly. Experiment with these techniques. Adapt them to your own learning style. And who knows, you might even discover a brand new vocabulary boosting technique.
Yeah, that would be awesome.
To share with the world. Now, here's your challenge for today. Pick just one of these techniques and spend 10 minutes trying it out.
Okay.
Choose 5 new words, put the technique into action, and see how it feels.
Yeah.
You might be surprised by how much you can achieve in such a short amount of time.
Absolutely.
And as you continue on your vocabulary journey, we want to leave you with this one final thought.
Okay.
What other creative ways can you incorporate these techniques into your daily life? How can you make them your own? The possibilities are endless.
They are.
We can't wait to hear about your progress.
Happy learning.